Good evening, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. This is Rich again, back for your third and final video blog of the night for Monday, May 18th, 2015, around 8:03 in the evening, Billerica, Massachusetts. Sun's going down. It was about 65 today, sunny and some clouds, but felt a lot cooler. Some news to report. The Miami Dolphins have signed quarterback Ryan Tannehill to a long-term contract extension that will run for the year 2020. It's $96 million with $45 million guaranteed. That's about it on that. My third and final video blog subject of the night is about the Pittsburgh Penguins back-to-back Stanley Cup championship teams of 1991 and 1992. The Penguins, during this time period, had a great team that was kind of like a dynasty in the making, but they didn't win several more championships after the 1992 season. And the core of the Pittsburgh Penguins included their captain, Mario Lemieux, Jaromir Jagr, Kevin Stevens, Joe Mullen, Brian Trottier, Mark Recchi for one of the Stanley Cups, Ron Francis, Rick Tocchet for another one of their Stanley Cups in 1992. They had some great defensive players, including Larry Murphy, Ulf Samuelsson, Kjell Samuelsson, Peter Taglianetti, Paul Stanton, Paul Coffey for one of them, and a few others, Gordy Roberts. And in net, they had Tom Barrasso as a goaltender. And they were coached in 1991 Stanley Cup winning team by Bob Johnson, who passed away during the middle of the 1991-92 season of cancer. He was replaced by Scotty Bowman, who was the coach for the 1992 Stanley Cup winning team of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Little bit of a history of the Penguins. They entered the NHL in 1967 when they expanded to 12 teams. The Penguins didn't have too much success on the ice, and they didn't have too many star players playing for the Penguins during the early years. In 1975, the Penguins were in bankruptcy. They were on the verge of being moved to Seattle, Washington, but local ownership in the Pittsburgh area bought the team, and the Penguins were kept from moving, but they still didn't have success, and the attendance at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, or Mellon Arena, which eventually it was called before the Penguins moved in 2010 to Consol Energy Arena, still stunk. 1980, the Penguins adopted the colors of black and gold, just like the other Pittsburgh sports team, the Steelers and the Pirates, and the ownership groups thought they were going to become a winner because of adopting those colors, black and gold. But still, they didn't. 1982, the Pittsburgh Penguins made the playoffs, but it was the last time they would make it for 7 years. The team fell into the basement of the NHL. There were rumors they were going to be moving out of Pittsburgh again to either Kansas City, Saskatchewan, or Atlanta, Georgia, but they had the number 1 pick of the 1984 NHL draft. And they selected Mario Lemieux out of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, who was scoring machine at that league and setting records. And Mario Lemieux, when he made his debut in the NHL in 1984, was an amazing player. He was probably the second best player in the National Hockey League in the 1980s behind Wayne Gretzky, but he didn't have too much of a supporting cast, and the Penguins continued to stink in the NHL, but they added some players here and there to the team, like Kevin Stevens and Mark Recchi, and they acquired some good players through trades in 1987. Paul Coffey, defenseman from the Edmonton Oilers. Mario Lemieux won the MVP in 1988, but still, the Penguins did not make the playoffs. They traded for goaltender Tom Barrasso in 1988 from the Buffalo Sabres, and in 1989, the Pittsburgh Penguins qualified for Stanley Cup playoffs for the first time since 1982. They faced off against the Rangers in the first round, the Patrick Division semifinals. They beat the Rangers, but they lost to their crosstown rivals, the Philadelphia Flyers, in the Patrick Division Finals. Mario Lemieux had a decent playoffs. In 1989-90, the Pittsburgh Penguins finished out of the playoffs picture again, even though they hosted the NHL All-Star Game. They needed a coach to try to guide them to the top, and they hired Bob Johnson, who was previously coach of the Calgary Flames, but he couldn't get the Flames over the top for the Stanley Cup playoffs. Mario Lemieux got hurt and missed most of the 1990-91 season, but the Pittsburgh Penguins were developing a decent core of like Kevin Stevens, Jaromir Jagr, Mark Recchi, Brian Trottier, who they got from the Islanders, John Cullen, Paul Coffey led the defense, along with like Larry Murphy and Paul Stanton and Ulf Samuelsson and Gordy Roberts, and the goaltender they had Tom Barrasso, and they were doing pretty decent and stuff. But a major trade happened at the trade deadline in 1991 NHL trade deadline. The Penguins traded John Cullen to the Hartford Whalers for Ron Francis, and this trade turned out to be awesome. The Penguins won their first division title, the Patrick Division champions, with 88 points, which was a little low for a Division 1, but that different NHL at the time. And then they faced off against the New Jersey Devils in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. The Patrick Division semifinals, they beat them in 7 games, and then they faced off against the Washington Capitals in the Patrick Division finals, beat the Capitals in 5 games, and this was and the Penguins won their first conference championship, the Campbell Conference Championship, facing off, the Prince of Wales Conference Championship. They faced off against the Boston Bruins. Boston Bruins still had a great team, like with Cam Neely, Ray Bourque, Andy Moog, and several others. They were coming off a Stanley Cup Finals appearance in 1990, and the Bruins were the odds-on favorites to win this series, and they took a 2-0 series lead. But during Game 2, an infamous thing happened. Penguins defenseman Ulf Samuelsson hurt Cam Neely's knee, and Cam Neely wasn't the same player after that. That knee injury had devastating effects for Cam Neely. He prematurely retired in 1996. When the series moved back to Pittsburgh, the Penguins took full control. They won the next 4 games, and then they made their first Stanley Cup Finals appearances, and they were facing off against the Cinderella Stories Minnesota North Stars, who finished with the worst of all 16-team playoff record-wise, but beat Chicago Blackhawks, St. Louis Blues, 2 of the teams that had the best records in the National Hockey League in 1990-91. They beat the Edmonton Oilers in the Campbell Conference Finals, and the Oilers still had a great team with Mark Messier and company, but the Minnesota North Stars were a Cinderella team, and they faced off against the Pittsburgh Penguins for the 1991 Stanley Cup Finals. This was the first All-American Stanley Cup Finals in 10 seasons. The Minnesota North Stars, Pittsburgh Penguins, it was a back-and-forth series. The Minnesota North Stars took a 2-1 series lead in Game 4, and a lot of people were saying that North Stars were going to do Cinderella stuff, but the Penguins took control of this series, and by the end, Game 6, the Penguins won their first Stanley Cup, 4-2. Mario Lemieux won the Conn Smythe Trophy, and Pittsburgh won its first Stanley Cup championship, and it was the first time the city of Pittsburgh won a sporting championship since 1980 with the Pittsburgh Steelers. During the summer of 1991, the Penguins coach, Bob Johnson, was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he passed away during the middle of the 1991-92 NHL season, and the Penguins had to temporarily hire a new coach, and the acting head coach, the legendary Scotty Bowman, who was the winningest coach in National Hockey League history. Penguins during the 1991-1992 season had a little bit of a Stanley Cup hangover. They kind of struggled in the standings. They made some trades. They traded Mark Recchi to the crosstown Philadelphia Flyers for Rick Tocchet. They traded Paul Coffey away to Los Angeles Kings, but still they had a good core of players with Joe Mullen and Brian Trottier, Kevin Stevens, Mario Lemieux, Jaromir Jagr, Larry Murphy on defense, Uf Samuelsson, Gio Samuelson, Peter Taglianelli, Paul Stanton, and they had Tom Barrasso in gold. And they finished in 1992, 87 points, which was good for third place in the Patrick Division. This was a year that the New York Rangers dominated that division. And the first round opponents for the Pittsburgh Penguins were the Washington Capitals, and the Washington Capitals took a commanding 3-1 series lead. But the Penguins stormed back and took the series in 7 games. The Capitals are known to blow 3-1 series leads. That happened this year against the New York Rangers. Then, the next series, the Pittsburgh Penguins beat the New York Rangers 4-2, and came at a price. Mario Lemieux got injured, and he missed significant time during the Stanley Cup playoffs. But then the Penguins rattled off win after win after win and after win. Afterwards, in the Wales Conference Finals, they beat the Boston Bruins 4 straight games. It was no match. Mario Lemieux came back from injury, and then the Pittsburgh Penguins were heading to their second straight Stanley Cup Finals to face off against an original 6-member, the Chicago Blackhawks, who won a lot of games in a row. To get to the Cup Finals, they knocked off their rivals, the St. Louis Blues, and then the Detroit Red Wings, and then the Edmonton Oilers, and then what was another All-American Stanley Cup Finals between Pittsburgh Penguins and Chicago Blackhawks. The Blackhawks at that time had some great players like, Jeremy Roenick and Dirk Graham and Ed Belfour in net, and Chris Chelios leading the defense. But the Chicago Blackhawks were no match for the Pittsburgh Penguins with Lemieux and Jagr and Stevens and Trottier and Mullen and Larry Murphy on defense, along with Samuelson and Stanton and stuff. Pittsburgh Penguins swept the Blackhawks in 4 straight games to win the second Stanley Cup championship. And Game 4, the Stanley Cup Finals, was the first time an NHL game was played in June, the 1992 Stanley Cup Finals, and was also the last time that Sports Channel America carried the NHL. Was Game 4 of the 1992 Stanley Cup Finals between Blackhawks and Penguins. Afterwards, a lot of joy in Pittsburgh, and a lot of hockey experts were saying that the Penguins were going to be the next dynasty, and a lot of people believed it because they had such good core players, like with Lemieux and Jagr and Francis and Mullen and Stevens and Murphy and Samuelson and Barrasso and goaltender. They were saying they could have challenged the Montreal Canadiens for 5 straight Stanley Cups. In 1992-93, the Pittsburgh Penguins changed their logo from the skating penguin to kind of the robotic penguin and stuff, and they finished first in the Patrick Division. They had Mario Lemieux, who missed significant time during that season because he was being treated for Hodgkin's disease, but he won the scoring title and MVP, and they had Jagr and they had Stevens still, and Francis was still contributing, and they still had a good defensive core. They beat New Jersey Devils in the first round of the playoffs, and then they faced off against New York Islanders in the second round, but the Islanders shocked the world and beat them in 7 games in overtime, ending this dynasty, which could have been a dynasty, but I think if they continued, I think it would have been a dynasty in my opinion. And but it didn't happen because Mario Lemieux was like frequently hurt. Barrasso became like an average goaltender after the cup runs. Ron Francis still contribute pretty good, and several other players were on the decline. Brian Trottier retired, but he came back for another season. And Rick Tocchet was, an average player. The defensive core got old, and the Penguins went into kind of mediocrity. They still made the playoffs, but they got bounced in the first or second round. And eventually, the Penguins got bankrupt again, and Mario Lemieux bought them out. And he prospered with the Penguins, eventually picking up Sidney Crosby and Yevgeny Malkin, that they won the Stanley Cup in 2009. I ranked the Pittsburgh Penguins teams of 1991 and 1992 probably as the top 10 teams of all time for Stanley Cup winning championships. They probably would have been ranked higher if they won several more Stanley Cups in a row, because they just had that core talent player. Plus they had Scotty Bowman as coach and Bob Johnson for one of the years, who passed away of cancer. And I think the Pittsburgh Penguins teams of 1991-92 could match up pretty good with maybe the Oilers teams of the 80s and the Montreal Canadiens teams of the 50s and 70s and the New York Islander teams of the early 1980s. This was a dynasty that would have been great, in my opinion. But it never was officially a dynasty because they never won the third championship with those core players of Lemieux, Yager, Mullen, and Francis and others. And that's about it on that. Be back tomorrow, Facebook friends, and YouTube and Twitter. You're going to get 3 more video blogs. First video blog will be the top 10 players in, in Thunder history. Sonic and Thunder history. And then the infamous curtain call that happened 19 years ago on May 19th, 1996 at Madison Square Garden between the Click members Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Triple H in the third and final video blog of the night. For that night, tomorrow night will be MBTA Bus Route 101 from Sullivan Square to Malden Center Station. Have a good night, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and keep calm. And I'm a Julie Bratton guy.